Good evening, my dear friends. Tonight I want to take you to a place that feels both rugged and alive, Rapid City, South Dakota. Picture a town carved into the edge of the Black Hills, where the wind sweeps across wide prairies and the shadow of Mount Rushmore looms in the distance. It's a crisp afternoon, the kind where the sky stretches endless and blue, and the air bites just enough to wake you up. The locals have gathered in a weathered community center, a brick building with a sloped roof, its walls lined with faded photos of pioneers and ranchers. Inside, the fluorescent lights flicker faintly, and the scent of brewed coffee mingles with the dust of old wooden floors. These are hardworking people, ranchers with sun-creased faces, nurses in faded scrubs, shopkeepers wiping their hands on aprons. They've come to hear Donald Trump speak. Yes, the Donald Trump, former president, deal-maker, a figure who stirs both cheers and whispers. He's there to talk about America, its struggles, its promise, his vision. The room is steady, not electric. There's no roar of a crowd, no flood of signs like you'd see at a big rally. Just a low hum of voices, a few coughs, the clink of a spoon against a mug as people settle into their seats. It's a moment that feels small, grounded, until it turns into something else entirely. Because then something unforgettable happens. A little girl stands up. Her name is Clara, and she's 8 years old. She's slight, her braids swinging as she rises, but there's a quiet fire in her that catches every gaze. In her hands, she holds an old Bible, its cover cracked and brown, its spine held together by a strip of tape. It's her great-aunt's, you can tell, a relic of faith passed down through generations. The room goes still. You can hear the wind rattling a loose window pane, the soft creak of a floorboard underfoot. And then, in a voice that's clear and unshaken, like a stream cutting through stone, she looks at Trump and asks, "Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?" Feel that question for a second. Let it settle. An 8-year-old girl in a room of adults asking something so pure, so piercing, that it slices through the ordinary like a blade. The murmurs fade. The restless shifting stops. It's as if the air itself thickens, everyone waiting, watching. Trump, a man who's faced down cameras and crowds with unshakable bravado, doesn't leap to respond. He doesn't toss out a quip or steer the conversation elsewhere. He pauses. His eyes find Clara's, and for a fleeting moment, something flickers across his face. A crack, a hint of stillness, a man beneath the myth. And then he speaks. Not the Trump of headlines or podiums, but someone digging into memory, into truth. He takes us back to Queens, New York, his childhood, a world of concrete and ambition. He talks about Sundays in the Presbyterian church, the echo of hymns, the way he'd sit there as a boy, staring at the cross, wondering what it all meant. I was a kid with questions, he says, his voice lower, softer. I'd listen to the preacher and think, why are we here? What's God got to do with it? He draws us into that younger self, curious, restless, caught between his father's drive and a tug towards something vast, something he couldn't grasp. Then he digs deeper. He brings up his brother Fred Jr., the one who was supposed to shine but faded instead. Trump's tone shifts as he recalls Fred's struggle with alcohol, the way it swallowed him the day he slipped away. That hit me hard, he says, and the words carry a bruise. I couldn't make sense of it. I'd look up and ask, why him? Why like that? Where was God when I needed him? He admits it rattled his faith, left him adrift. I didn't know what I believed anymore, he says. Maybe I still don't, not all the way. The room is hushed, heavy with the kind of silence that listens. People tilt forward, eyes wide, because this isn't the Trump they're used to. This is a man who's faced the storm, who's stood in the dark and kept walking. He presses on, his voice firm but unguarded. Faith isn't about having it easy, he says. It's not about looking strong all the time or knowing every answer. It's about the grind, the getting up when you're down, the holding on when you're lost. It's not pretty, but it's what's real. Those words sink in, spreading through the crowd like a slow wave. You can see it. Ranchers nodding, a woman twisting a tissue in her hands. They're not just hearing a story, they're seeing their own lives mirrored back. A leader, yes, but one who's human, who's fought the same battles they have. But here's where the magic unfolds. Clara's question, it's a match struck in the quiet, and it lights up the room. A man stands next. He's older, wiry, with a face carved by years under the Dakota sun. I lost my son 5 years ago, he says, his voice rough as gravel. Car accident, gone in a blink. I cursed God for months. Couldn't look at the sky without shaking my fist. But one night, out in the pasture, I heard the wind, just the wind, and it felt like he was there. Not loud, not clear, but enough. His jaw tightens, but his eyes soften like he's found a fragile piece. Then a woman rises, mid-30s, her nurse's badge still clipped to her sweater. I've seen people die, she says, her voice steady but thin. Worked the ER through the worst of it. Sickness, overdoses, you name it. I stopped believing for a while. It was too much. But then I'd hold a patient's hand and they'd look at me and I'd feel something bigger than me. It's what keeps me going. She sits, but her words linger, sharp and true. The stories keep coming. A teenage boy, lanky and shy, talks about his mom walking out, how he'd sit in his room praying she'd come back, how faith became his anchor when she didn't. A woman with silver hair shares how she rebuilt after a fire took her store, whispering psalms to herself as she swept the ashes. A truck driver, his voice booming, recalls a near miss on the highway, how he felt guided, spared, even when he couldn't explain it. Each tale is its own jagged piece, but they fit together. Stories of breaking, of searching, of finding something to hold on to. And it all circles back to Clara, that little girl with the taped-up Bible and the fearless soul. Her question didn't just touch Trump, it cracked the room wide open. People who'd sat as strangers are now spilling their hearts, loss, fear, grace, binding themselves together in the telling. What began as a political stopover dissolves into something sacred, a gathering of lives stitched by struggle and lit by hope. The community center feels alive now, warmer, fuller, like a hearth glowing in the dusk. As the voices fade, Trump looks at Clara again. His face is gentler, his eyes carrying a quiet shine. "Thank you, Clara," he says, and there's a tenderness there, unscripted and real. "You've got guts, kid, more than most of us. You've given us a gift today." And he's right, because that day in Rapid City isn't about agendas or speeches anymore. It's about humanity, about faith that bends but endures, about hope that whispers through the cracks, about the way we rise when we let ourselves be known. So let me ask you, my friends, what's your Rapid City? What's the moment that shakes you, that strips you down, that makes you see the world and yourself with new eyes? We all have our Freds, those wounds that cut deep. We all have our nights of wrestling, our days of wondering. But we also have our Claras, those glimmers, those voices that pull us back. Maybe it's a child's question, maybe it's a stranger's kindness, a dawn breaking after a long fight, a memory that says you're enough. Whatever it is, it's yours, and it's worth hearing. That afternoon in Rapid City started with a purpose. Talk policy, press flesh, move on. But it ended with something no one could have mapped out. A room of people, raw and real, sharing their shadows and their light. Leaders are human, just like us. They falter, they question, they seek. And sometimes it takes an 8-year-old with a battered Bible and a lion's heart to show us that. To prove that the deepest questions don't need polished answers, just true ones. So here's my challenge to you. What does God mean to you? What's the faith that steadies you, the hope that lifts you up? You don't have to shout it, you don't have to know it all now. But maybe today's the day to listen, to that small voice within, to your own Clara calling you back to life. Thank you, my friends, for letting me share this story with you. It's one I carry close, and I hope it finds a home with you too.